Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Cybernetic Economy podcast, where we discuss the future of the economy and human collaboration. Technologies such as artificial intelligence, robotics, biotech, internet are moving incredibly fast. They are influencing every part of our lives, and progressively that's happening more and more. However, the ways how human institutions are built and how society coordinates largely remain the same over many decades and in some cases centuries. So in this podcast, we are going to explore new ways how to rebuild institutions, how to rebuild coordination mechanisms using mechanism design, using cryptography, using decentralized technologies, using the governance technologies and artificial intelligence. Today, I am joined by my friend Timour Kosters, who is co-founder of Edge City. And the first question to Timour is, can you tell the story of how did you get to the idea of Edge City and pop-up cities and network states?
Certainly, yeah. And thanks so much for having me. So let me explain what all of those things are and then also give a little bit of background for myself. So my background is I studied mathematics, econ, and computer science. I spent about 10 years building startups of various kinds, primarily in New York. The most recent 5 years of that has been in the blockchain space. And I was running a fund. It was a investment DAO called C Club Ventures. And I was invited to attend an event called Zuzalu. Zuzalu was an event that was initially conceptualized by Vitalik Buterin. And so what we did was we did a 2-month event in Montenegro on the coast. We had about 200 people living there the whole time and about 800 visitors throughout that time. So around about 1,000 people who came. And it was an environment really created just for experimentation. So we had a wide variety of people. We had different programming every week. I was actually initially invited to run the AI X crypto track. This was about 2 years ago. So this was before AI crypto intersection was becoming really a big thing. And, you know, we had people like Imad Mustaq, the founder of Stability AI. We had Grimes, the musical artist, and probably about 40, 50 other speakers who are now very much the leaders in this space. It ended up being a very meaningful experience for me personally. And the reason that is that I was able to really express many different sides of my personality. So there was obviously the intellectual side. I was getting a lot of, traction with the different talks and the different topics and the different people that were there. But also I was able to, really have fun and really be playful and like do cold plunges in the Adriatic Sea with a bunch of people who I already knew from the internet or from Twitter, and I was like meeting in real life. We were eating healthy. We had a Brian Johnson, don't die inspired diet that was being served. There were all these kind of vignettes, all these little moments where by the end of it, I was like, what was this insane, surreal experience that I just had, and how can I get more of it? Long story short, I essentially over that time got close with the organizing team. Janine, who is now my co-founder at Edge City, she co-created Zuzalu with Vitalik and a few others, and her and I became close. And then I essentially volunteered to organize the second big Zuzalu event, which was in Istanbul. And through the experience of doing that, got much closer to this concept and saw the potential of what pop-up cities could be. We decided through conversations with Vitalik and the community that it would actually be better to decentralize Zuzalu as a concept. So no longer do like Zuzalu branded events, but encourage many other people to try different iterations of this.
Can you tell more about the Edge City today? For over the past couple years, what you guys achieved and how do you define it
Totally.
today?
Yeah, totally. So Edge City is in its current state. It's a network of what we call pop-up villages or pop-up cities. The terminology is a little vague, but essentially what we do is we gather people who are working at the frontiers of tech, science, and society and culture in pop-up villages to live together for a month at a time. And it's generally about 1,000 people, 300 full time for the month, the rest of them visitors for a few weeks or a few days. And the intention is really to create an environment for experimentation. So we want people to come out of their kind of normal bubbles of default life and actually come into a place where they can try new habits or try new ways of living healthy or try new education models. And specifically with an emphasis on building versus just passive consumption of content or information. What results is there's just this incredible, emergent, diverse space of ideas where people are learning from each other. They're actively building new projects or the projects that they were already working on. There's so much serendipity because people are, having dinner with each other, with people that they've never met, or they're going on hikes together, or they're doing cold plunges and saunas, etc. It's really a space created for meaningful connection, but with the intention to actually, incubate new ideas about technology or how society should be structured, etc. We follow several principles that form our particular flavor of network society. So this is where Edge City starts to differentiate itself from other experiments like this. We care a lot about multidisciplinarity. So although we came out of the blockchain space, we have put a lot of effort into making it a multidisciplinary space. So we have a lot of folks from a variety of industries, obviously in frontier tech, so AI, biotech, robotics, etc., but also from cultural fields. And we have artists and we have philosophers and writers and people who are more on the social science side of things. There are academics and there are builders. There are people just starting their careers who are really excited to learn and try new things. There are experts who've been around for a while, which leads me to the next point, which is we make it very multi-generational. So we explicitly make it family friendly, and that means allowing families with kids to come. It means, people bring their parents, they bring their grandparents, and it creates this just like incredible community, honestly, like village-like environment. I think village is a good term for it. The third one is that we are co-creation and building focused. So I mentioned this, but what that means, the building side is we want people to actually come with the intention to work on something. So that could be, progressing a research paper you're writing. It could be the startup you're working on. It could be, you might work at a big company, but are interested in kind of hacking on something on the side. And the co-creation piece is kind of part of this philosophy, which touches on our theory of change, which is we want solutions to come from the ground up. We want people to try new things. We want people to be engaged in co-creating the experience for each other. We don't want top-down control where we decide all of the different talks that happen, all of the different sessions, etc. So we think of ourselves as much more like the bazaar rather than the cathedral, if you're familiar with the open source framing, where we create the structure for the bazaar to, function. But then the people that come actually create the experience. And then the last principle that we follow is what we call default healthy, which just means making it so easy, just completely by default, to live a healthy lifestyle. Like the food you eat is good, you're working out every day, everyone else is doing it, so you might as well do it as well. That I think is just obviously important and so rare in the cities and the environments that most people live in. So that's the way that we approach the experiences we create. We've done this several times now. So we've done an event called Edge City Denver in the US. We also did one called Edge Esmeralda in California, which was a full month in June of last year. For that one, we partnered with a new permanent city project called Esmeralda, which we can touch on later. And then we did Edge City Lana, which happened in Thailand, which was a month in October. So yeah, that's what it is, and that's what we've done so far.
Yeah, I was at Lana in Thailand. It was an amazing experience and really met a lot of people. And I think for me it was just like this value of networking, but it's not a conference where you have a 5-10 minutes interaction. It was actually like very deep relationships and deep vibing, where you have time, few days or weeks to spend with other people and discuss some deep ideas. But also you mentioned that you said that it's an experiment and it's a platform for experimentation a few times. And I think this is not the first time that people realize that actually you can decide where you live or who you live with or like what community are you part of. I'm curious, what is the evolution and what is the difference compared to over decades or maybe centuries? We had different examples like retreats or co-living experience, or even some cities and Burning Man and other initiatives where people come and live together for a long time. What's changed now? You mentioned blockchain and technology aspect of it. Can you say like what else? Why it's becoming more relevant today?
Yeah. No, I love this because I think it's important for people to realize that this isn't some brand new thing that people just cooked up out of nowhere, right? Like this has a long lineage of thought and various experiments. And I actually just wrote an essay about this where I tried to just give examples throughout history of times when people have taken temporary breaks away from mainstream society or created spaces that allowed for new discussions or new experimentation. I talked about, the Enlightenment salons of 17th and 18th century France, where they were not academic spaces. They were definitely not governmental spaces. They were just salons, usually run by influential women, where people would come and they would debate ideas. And out of those environments, which obviously were temporary, we got, kind of the foundations of modern liberalism and democracy and those kinds of concepts. And what that needed was a space for those ideas to iterate and to evolve and actually to undergo, the process of evolution where different people try different things, and some ideas were shot down, some ideas, grew because of their because of how interesting they were. You mentioned some of the, another parallel could be like the Back to the Land movement of the 60s and 70s, or for example, Burning Man. And I think the central thread here is that lives on in what we're doing is this idea of experimentation and taking time away from the mainstream to think about what society could be and how it could be improved. The difference now is that we live currently in a networked age. So to create a contrast with a couple of the examples, with the Back to the Land movement in the 60s, a lot of people were reacting to, there was a lot of reaction to a lot of different stuff, but let's say by and large, people were reacting to the Vietnam War and kind of the excesses of consumer culture and things like this. But they would go and they would live on a farm and they would learn to farm themselves, and they would completely remove themselves from society. And that was kind of the actual goal, and that's what they were interested in. We are obviously a very different type of project for two reasons. One is that we have access to all of, the suite of technologies that currently exists. We have the internet. We're not trying to separate people from their prior lives. It's explicitly a temporary break in order to allow for new ways of thinking. And then we very much, you got to leave by the end of it. You got to go back to where you're from and spread the ideas and, talk about what happened. Very much stay in touch with the broader reality through the internet while you're there. We're also very just like frontier tech focused. Like, how can we use the latest technology to enable connection between people and, and community creation versus, the way that a lot of people interface with technology now, which is just in day-to-day lives. You're kind of interacting with the algorithm in various ways. I think it's fair to say that, with rising depression rates and things like this, there is just the relationship that people have with technology day to day is not necessarily the most healthy one, or at least it can be not healthy. We try to create an environment where we use the latest tech, but in a way that actually enables, like I mentioned, people to really connect, people to experience what it's like to use, for example, cryptography to connect with others and be connected with people with shared interests, but have none of your private data leaked to any kind of third-party server or anything. Lots of applications with AI as well. So I think there's just a very clear difference there. We're a very different kind of project. A quick contrast with Burning Man as well. So I've been going to the Burn for a long time. I think it's a very cool, interesting experience. If people feel called to it, I always recommend it if you can swing it. It's the most like WTF, awe-inspiring just moments of like, wow, how did someone think of that? But I think it's a very different goal again, where to me, the Burn is somewhere where you can really just like push creativity and artistic expression to the extreme. And you just have this like very quick, LARP of what would it be like if things were like this, But I want to create spaces where people come and they can try out new things. They can push the edges of, what's possible, but with the explicit intention of like, well, you're going to do this for a month or two. Like, what if life could actually be this way? Like, let's actually incubate the things that it would require for that. And I think, when you're at Burning Man, a lot of people are like, wow, what if we just live like this forever? I actually don't want that. And I actually think most people there don't, because it's too extreme, right? You can do it for a week and it's a peak experience, but doing it for a year, I think would, I'm sure like some people have. I think one thing I'll mention though, and last thing I'll say is, the Burn is Burning Man as a concept is a very interesting comparable for what's happening with network states, because Burning Man is, I think it's an example of what they call like a cosmo-local movement, meaning it's local in the sense that people gather in a particular place, IRL, but it's cosmic, it's global in the sense that the concept, the idea of doing a burn has traveled all over the world, right? There's regional burns in most countries, in most geographies, there's different varieties of them, etc. And so what they did was they created a set of principles for how to gather, right? It's an experience, it's a festival, people bring their own entertainment, whatever. It's very emergent as well, which is another inspiration for us. Very kind of interesting combination of being local and global, what Michelle Bounds calls the cosmo-local type of, idea. And I think that kind of thing is very important to cultivate more of, especially in the technologies that we create and etc. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think, and also people like they go to Burning Man one week a year, but they spend maybe the whole year preparing, working on our projects and so on. And for me, I think you need this. It's kind of like technology tree. So there's ideas that are built on top of other ideas, and the product is the vibe. And for Burning Man, the vibe is this artistic vibe. I've talked to and heard about dozens of different pop-up village network state projects around the world. At least right now, most of them are still either most of them either became real estate projects, so they are more concerned about like, how do I buy land and build houses and sell like these square meters, or they became something that is purely online and they're more focused on like tokens and cryptocurrency aspect of it, which is still like, both of these things are not about vibes. And I think like Edge City is the best example that actually focuses on the mission And I want to talk about two things that you just mentioned. First is products, and secondly is like, what is the long-term vision here?
Yeah.
Like, for example, you said that right now it's a temporary thing. You come for a month, then you leave. But do you see these at someday becoming a permanent one? And should it be a permanent thing? Or is it like, I think Burning Man, if it was always there, it will become just like a hippie commune and like it won't be as fun. I think. Yeah, what's your take?
Yeah, so on the idea of temporary and permanent, I think we right now think of ourselves as being very much as kind of exploring the idea maze here, meaning we're going to try a lot of different things with an idea of what, we think will work. And then over time we're going to make, decisions based on the things that we learn. So part of that is we want to go all around the world and do experiences all around the world, temporary ones, in order to learn where actually makes sense potentially for something permanent, right? There are lots of projects, including really big ones, that kind of call themselves network state projects that are very well funded. They are actively scouting different parts of the world. And what that involves is they send a team to various jurisdictions, to various plots of land, and they say, okay, everyone, like, close your eyes. Can you imagine a brand new city here where everyone's thriving or whatever? And I think that makes sense to do, but to me, it's just so obvious that first you should just try it for a month. Like, just see what happens. Mm-hmm. And you get a lot of benefits from doing that. One of them is that you actually start to build the connections between people, where people start to share experiences. They start to care about each other. Those are the people that will be your first movers, right? Into your new city, wherever it ends up being. So what I see the pop-up cities as doing is bootstrapping the networks of affinity mm-hmm. and kinship that eventually will be the strong thing that actually allows us to create the world we want to see, right? At the end of the day, it's all about people and how people relate to each other, right? Some people call it community, some people call it, network, whatever. But that's ultimately what it's about. So for us, we definitely have permanence in our future. We don't know if we are going to set up an edge city somewhere. It's totally possible, like a 10-year time horizon. We already are starting to put roots down in various parts around the world, but we're partnering with people for whom their entire purpose in life is to create this incredible, beautiful, permanent new town, new city, new project.
Is Esmeralda one of those?
Yeah, so that's a really clear example that we can point to and I can talk about. So like I mentioned, we did an event called Edge Esmeralda last June. It was a month long, just an hour north of San Francisco. We are the edge side of it, and Esmeralda is a new town project started by Devin Zugel, who intends to make it a walkable, family-friendly, beautifully designed, I've seen some of the renders, new town about an hour north of SF in Sonoma. It's just an incredible vision. It's so wonderful, the idea of having something like that. But, when you're someone like Devin, you're creating this project, you can tell people all day long what you intend to create with this new project. But another way to showcase that is to do a pop-up village. And so we collaborated on this event, which was held in Healdsburg, which is about 10-15 minutes away from where the new town will be. So it's kind of the closest possible viable town to host something like what we did. And it was amazing. It was essentially a month of LARPing what this new town will be like, right? It's like experts coming from all over the world to share their knowledge with our attendees and with the locals. There's kids running around. There's already a town there. There's infrastructure. So we kind of blended into it. which was great. And yeah, and I mean, there's all kinds of other cool things that came out of it, startups and new research projects. And we had, people building entirely new structures in the woods out of, like we made an A-frame that was made out of solar panels, and we used it to power our closing party and things like this. So it was an amazing event, but it also just brought so much energy to the new town, and it really accelerated that project and its timeline. So over time, we're going to keep doing the event. We're doing it again in this coming June, 2025. Similar concept. We'll keep building on the ideas, keep making it better. And every year we will bring more and more energy to this project. And over time, it will actually start to happen in Esmeralda. And then Esmeralda will become a node in this growing Edge City network. And I imagine this is kind of a microcosm of the type of project that we would like to do more of. So there will be multiple of these around the world. I've been spending time in Bhutan recently, and they're doing a new city project there. That's another potential thing where we can start to get involved. And in that sense, I feel like we've kind of found product market fit, where there's so much desire from people building long-term real estate, town, etc. projects, to have the world's best innovators come and spend a month in or next to, their project. So yeah,
so it's kind of like merge between the so Edge City brings technology, like social technology, society technology, as well as like actual like applications like Zupass, or I don't know, payments and reputation and collaboration stuff, with the growing market and growing desire for people to build new locations or just live together.
Yeah.
And if you just build a new village, okay, you can do it. There's a ton of projects, or I don't build a new development project. That is not going to change anything in terms of how the community operates. And then your like know-how is this. I still thinking about this as a vibe technology. How do you bring the right system, the right connection technology to make it more, I don't know, more human, less have a real face.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And the cool thing is that, like I mentioned, we're not just hanging out in these spaces. It's not just like a vacation. It's people coming who are agentic themselves. Like they want to come and they want to build, and they're excited about the possibility of building a product that's used by a new city, right? So what a cool experience to come and incubate new technology in the place where it could be used. It could form the baseline of an entirely new town that's going to exist and be built over the next 10, 20 years. So if you're building like a AI product for connection, or you're building kind of like a protocol or blockchain substrate that you think can be useful in this context, it's incredible to be in this space, because you can actually start to think like, wait, this isn't just going to be used by some ethereal, cloud, community in the cloud or whatever. These are like real people. They're going to live here. They're buying houses. They're pre-buying stuff. And I can actually be involved in creating the fabric of this new place. So it's just like a really cool thing that's happening. And I should mention this, we care a lot about what we call integration, not exit, meaning this is another way that I feel like Edge City is different to some of the other network state concepts. We are way less interested in exit in the sense of removing ourselves entirely and building our own like new place or island somewhere. We, again, temporary micro exits and then integrating back into society. And so I think the things that we're incubating, the things that we're building, will eventually find use cases in your neighborhood in Brooklyn, or your town that you live in Oregon, or wherever, all over the world. And as we do these pop-ups in various places around the world, we're going to learn so much from their trial and errors and their, mistakes and attempts at various things. And if we can just create systems of sharing those learnings. Everything's open source that we do. I think we're just going to accelerate like societal learning, societal development. Like you mentioned, tech is moving fast. Society is not. Institutions are not. So let's try to like even that out a little bit. Let's actually try things out. Yeah.
Let's maybe like I don't know, dream about how it might look like in 10 years or 20 years in terms of like right now. If anyone wants to participate at Edge City, they just go on the website, sign up, fly or drive to where the next one is, and spend a week or a month there. But once it has this permanent nodes and there's just more density and more of these locations, I think today, like in 2025, if you want to like spend time in different pop-up village and pop-up cities projects, you could like leave the whole year.
Totally.
The problem is it might be exhausting, and for people with families or just if you want to focus and work and if you want to have some kind of routine, it would be maybe too hard. How this might look like in 10 years, because I want to be embedded in the society. I want to work on something. I want to build startups or do art or do research projects. But I also see a lot of value of being mostly connected with the people with whom I share the values, rather than being just part of some nation or city or like large faceless identity.
Totally. Yeah, totally. I mean, that is part of the reason why I think this is so interesting, right? Like giving people a bit more choice and a bit more agency in the communities that they want to spend time with. So I'll give you two visions of the future, one from the point of view of the lived experience of someone. So let's say, it's you in 10 years, you have a family, you might be based in Lisbon, but once a year in the summer, you spend a month in South Africa, and that's your chosen kind of experimentation pop-up. And you go there, it's a community that your kids know all the other kids. You get to share your learnings about everything you've been working on over the past year. You're just surrounded by a plethora of people sharing their knowledge, and you guys get to collaborate on some ideas. You get inspired, you get energized. And then you might do that 2 or 3 times a year. And I think this will just become a normal part of people's livelihoods, and hopefully it's all over the world. So it's not just confined to like a certain place. There's actually a very clear parallel of this historically. It's called the Chautauqua movement. It started in the 1880s in a town in upstate New York called Chautauqua. There were essentially, it was kind of a 2-month-long learning festival that started, and university professors would come during the summer and they would give public lectures, and it became a thing. And so suddenly all over the country over the following few decades, every town had a Chautauqua, which was essentially like a public learning festival, and people would gather and they would share, what they've been working on and things like this. And what's cool about that is that it started in a single place, and then it spread all over the country it wasn't like there wasn't a company doing this stuff. It was completely emergent, right? I think there's a lot of parallels there. So that's from the point of view of the actual lived experience of someone. At a higher level, I think what's interesting, I mean, forecasting out 10 years is kind of a futile exercise right now, just given everything that's happening. But let's just say, like, I don't know, it's loosely similar to how things are now, which seems exceedingly unlikely. But just in the context of this, I want Edge City, or like parts of our mission, I would say, is to inspire 1,000 of these types of experiments. Like, we should not be the only ones. We should not even be the majority. There should be so many different attempts at this, of, gathering in various sizes of groups in various contexts with various flavors, and just trying things out, like I want communities to have agency over the way that they are, the way that they live, the way they're governed, the way they come to decisions. I think people in general should just be much more, should have the ability to be much more active in their lives, right? Like politically, I think for many people, it's like a once every 4 years thing that they engage with. But actually, I think it should be something where we all feel like we're part of a community that we can help govern and we can be involved in. And either in the place that you live or in the internet community that you're a part of that meets up once a year at a pop-up village and then dissipates. It could be at your local food co-op. It could be, whatever. So, and really, I think all of those things, I think we are all multifaceted and should have governance over all of those aspects of our lives. And so at the community level, the pop-up city level, I think this should just be ubiquitous and super, super common and really healthy, right? Like, even if you live in a neighborhood, you probably don't know the people that you live next to. Maybe you don't even have to go anywhere. Maybe it's just 1 week a year. You all decide this is the week that we're going to go out on our street and we're going to sit with our neighbors and we're going to share, what we've been thinking about, or we're going to share a meal. And if we can just create the norms, the social technology, like you said, to enable that, I think that's just going to be a huge win.
Mm-hmm. You are describing this, and what we've been discussing before is you are describing this in the form of like layer on top of existing infrastructure. So we have like real nation states, we have real cities, villages, and then we have this virtual layer. One, I think there's like two general thoughts of schools of thoughts regarding network states. One is where it is integrated or built on top, and this is like this cybernetic virtual plus physical layer of communication, of collaboration on top of physical infrastructure, and another where it is really replacing or somehow creating something new from scratch, like completely new, like you take a desert and build a new country there, which like the second one doesn't seem realistic, but I think that's what generally like people who haven't been there, who are not involved in this, that's the most common understanding and definition that I hear. Why do you think this layer approach is like the way to go? And is it really possible, or should we even try to build something from scratch?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So I think this is where kind of ideas about network societies, network states start to overlap with other kind of adjacent but somewhat different fields of, startup societies, startup cities, charter cities, etc. I think building new cities from scratch is I think, net probably a positive thing to aim at, depending on the who's doing it and their intentions. But in general, I think cities are incredible drivers of progress and can lift many people out of poverty. So I think the more like thoughtfully done new city projects, probably the better. That said, I think we're just trying to do, for now, like us, Edge City is just trying to do something different. Again, like we're trying to come at this with a stance of, okay, we know that we don't know the exact right thing, and we know that we're not going to do like a top down, this is it, everyone fall in line, this is what's happening. We want to experiment, right? For us, the way that manifests is it just makes much more sense to be the software layer on top of the hardware layer of, either the new town, like you're saying, or just the current hardware that exists, which is the state that we happen to live in. For me personally, I'm interested in this like layer 2 concept, because I think over time people are just going to start caring less about the place that they happen to have been born and caring more about the communities of affinity and kinship that they choose to belong to based on values and shared experiences and the memories they've created with people at pop-up villages or whatever. And I think that's actually a really healthy thing. Like I said, I think we just need much higher bandwidth, like what they call high bandwidth democracy in terms of, or governance, in terms of the things that govern our lives, right? So I want to be involved in the local school district because I have kids there. I might want to be involved in the governance of the river that runs through my town and the state, but could also cover like other nation states. So everyone along that river forms some kind of polity or some kind of public, and we have shared governance, shared resources. There's the equivalence of that in digital space. So for me, those aspects are just much more interesting somehow. I'm curious for your thoughts there. I'm finding it hard to like put into detail why I think that's interesting, but yeah, where do you land on that?
There is a need, there is a desire for people to have this to have this vibe shift, to have stronger feeling of belonging. At the same time, any project in the history that was trying to reinvent or build something from scratch, to reinvent society, ended up being like any kind of revolution ended up destroying a lot of things. So if it is like, I don't know, 100 years, 500 years ago, it was inevitable. It had to have like a destruction of the current system to build a new one. Right now, I think we have a physical system that works good enough in some cases. And then on top of that, we can build the digital system. That's the government, the governance stack. That's programmable governance that new technologies allow. So like you have AI representative that can communicate with other AIs. You have blockchain to record all these communications. You have like governance algorithms that can be pluggable governance algorithms. You test them first on a small scale in a like small village of 100 people, and then hopefully scale it up to hundreds of millions of people. And that is the ideal path. In the same time, there is definitely a there's definitely a lot of failure modes. There's a lot of failures right now with the governance systems, and a lot of those are basically, you cannot build blockchain governance, or you cannot build pop-up city or network state in dictatorships, in authoritarian countries, in those places where this layer one is dysfunctional.
Yeah. So okay, let me actually give a better answer, because what you just said inspired some thinking in me. But this is essentially an answer to your question around the difference between L1s, L2s, and, create a whole new thing versus change it from within, or at least the place that we currently live. So this is kind of the age-old question, right? Do you change the system from within, or do you like revolution entirely, scrap it and start again? And history has shown us many times over that often revolution does not lead to anything better, and in fact kind of can actually backslide things into a worse place. So I think, there's this great Buckminster Fuller quote of, don't try to change the thing from within, just showcase a better alternative. Mm-hmm. And I think that is what is in the process of happening right now. Yeah. And there's already examples of what I think of as this kind of layer 2 that sits on top of the L1 of existing infrastructure. And that is things like, for example, decentralized currencies, cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum. They exist in a state of having no, meaningful intermediaries that can get in the way of the functionality of them, especially not from current nation states. That's, I think, really good, right? And that's really healthy. And that just exists now in the world. And it's something that we can use. And as more people start to understand it and on board to it, you might actually be able to spend most of your year and most of your transactions just entirely at that strata without having to convert back to fiat, maybe, maybe for certain things like taxes, but that now exists and that's amazing. Another thing is identity. And this is something that needs a bit more work, but is now being built on top of that primitive. So having decentralized identity protocols is extremely important, because if you can create some kind of, trust system without having to rely on existing, arbiters of power essentially telling you, okay, this is a real human and we've issued them identification, then you can start to have like a peer-to-peer type of identity system that again is this layer 2 that is now broken free of this the layer 1 system in which we live. And all of these things are really powerful, because what they then enable is, if you have a community or an interest group or this new, global network society that you want to start, we now have the tools for it, right? You can crowdfund money from people all over the world. You can check that they're real humans using decentralized identity primitives. You can do all sorts of cool stuff without having to rely on any kind of existing state. And the reason this is so important and potentially interesting for people who currently live in autocracies and who are listening to this and they're like, cool, man, it's cool you're doing villages in California, but what about me, right? I live in wherever and I can't even, I can barely get a visa to exit the country, let alone, think about living in a network state. And what's interesting here is that as these parallel society groups start to get more agency and more autonomy and more like collective bargaining power, they can start to, strike deals with countries and say, hey, we're actually exploring this right now. Something like, okay, Malaysia gives you 500 visas over the next 5 years, and you can essentially nominate people that you say, these are good people, they're part of our community, and we want them to come and live here for, 2-year stint and work, etc. And so now you actually start to be able to get the collective power to take people that live somewhere where, they're in an autocratic regime and actually help them get out of that potentially. So I think this is where it starts to become interesting, and where this could actually have hopefully a positive benefit for people who don't happen to live in, the global north or the west or whatever.
And I think it's not just specifically to help certain countries. So there's two things that you mentioned that are super interesting. First one is the idea that good products eventually win. So like cryptocurrency, over the past 10 years, it started as completely unregulated or in many cases completely outlawed system that was a superior product in many cases to banking. And from this something marginal that people didn't understand, it now became a thing that many countries are considering to store their national treasury in, and BlackRock's and JP Morgan's and all these companies are holding Bitcoin reserves and so on. Why? Because it is a better product in terms of like it is actually more fungible, more easier to transfer, easier to divide, more programmable, more predictable than gold. Then Ethereum is doing the same for financial system. And for the government technologies or like society technologies, like typically these things are being built by governments or maybe large corporations. And example of identity, there's a lot of digital identity systems, or there's a lot of digital payment systems. The problem with them because you have this technology and you can use this technology to control as much as possible, they are being implemented in a very centralized form. And there's not enough collective bargaining power. So every digital identity system in the world today, anything that is popular, and I spent a few years working on this space, is centralized, either owned by banks or corporations or governments directly. And building these alternative layers of the stack like society stack is the only way to then create transition to a more open, more cybernetic, more more open system.
Totally.
And that has to happen, because otherwise it is easy to destroy something. You can like say that, okay, the world is not just, it's closed, like we're being manipulated, controlled. There's a lot of political ideas like this, and they typically get a lot of, they become popular pretty quick. The problem is you can destroy and there's nothing to replace it. Actually, things that replace it are usually not better, typically even worse. So in my view, it is about building this alternative stack and testing it out and like using this really iterative approach. And what we discussed is now we can build these systems. We can build coordination systems using all the great tools and using all the great kind of knowledge and experience that we have in software engineering. So we can now have systems that are cryptographically secure. We can fork them, we can improve, we can iterate quickly, we can A/B test, and we can, as we discussed, gradient descent into more optimal solution. You mentioned identity. What are other tools that are either being built within kind of HCT ecosystem today, or you wish that they'd be built?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think that we are uniquely suited for certain types of products. I'll talk about what they are, but one thing I want to mention is that my thesis is that new types of products will emerge out of pop-up cities that could not have come out of traditional accelerators or think tanks or government entities or private markets. I believe that something about this type of entity, like the pop-up cities and then the network that gets created between them, will lead to fundamentally new innovations.
Is it because you say that like you can build unique products? Is it because traditionally, if you're building something like a government technology, you probably it takes you years to sell it or to get pilot, and here you can just go and test it tomorrow morning?
That's 100% part of it. I think also just something very unique about the experience is that you're surrounded by hundreds of people that are really keen to try new things. So you're just going to get different types of feedback, right? And these are people who are, leaders in their fields or really talented young individuals. I think it's the kind of IRL feedback loop that you can't really get anywhere else. And then plus there's the networked aspect of it. So having these all over the world and having that kind of knowledge sharing. So I think there's unique characteristics to this type of ecosystem that I believe will lead to, new types of projects. And so what could those be? Pretty much from the beginning, we've had people experimenting with various identity products. And the reason I think this is interesting and why we are well suited for it is that, well, first of all, we have a big need for it. We have like a lot of the way that we interface with our attendees touches on aspects of their identity, right? Like we need to know their names or what they want us to call them. We need to know their contact details. We need to know different aspects of their, like nationality so that we can help them with visas and things like this. How do we store that information? What parts of that do they want to give to us, and what do they want to keep hidden? Do they want to share that with their fellow attendees, for example? Like, these are the questions that instantly come up and that have to be solved. And so we've had products like Zupass, which was incubated at Zuzalu, and that we've continued to really support. And, for those who don't know, it's kind of a very basic identity primitive built on a new kind of cryptographic concept called proof carrying data, which is extremely rich and very, very exciting, but essentially allows you to participate in things like this and participate in polls and surveys and voting and all this stuff, while keeping anything that you want private. And it can interface on chain with like anything on chain. So you can, let's say we issued someone a proof carrying data that they were an attendee at Edge City in Esmeralda and Edge City Lana, and then we had a vote. They could create a proof that they were certainly an attendee at one Edge City event, and that gives them the right to vote in whatever governance decision we have. So these are kind of the initial building blocks, but you can imagine that at a country level, or at at the level of like 1 million people, these start to become really important, because you have like cryptographically secure voting mechanisms and ways of participating. Cursive is the other example I mentioned. Incredible team. We've had them at multiple of our events, and they have they're also cryptography folks. They basically use the most kind of cutting edge cryptography to enable human connection. So they did a thing at our last event in Thailand where everyone on their wristband had an NFC chip, and you could scan other people's chips and it would show you your shared interests, for example. And what's cool about that is what's happening is what's called private set intersection. So it knows your interests, it knows mine, and it can calculate the intersection of those and show us what we're both interested in, with no data leaving our phones to some server somewhere to make that comparison.
I think it's a good example of like just this also cybernetic system that improves the experience. I just was at the conference, AI conference here in New York, and when you're at the conference, you meet random people and you spend 5-10 minutes talking to them just to understand like what do they do, like is there anything relevant? Because maybe some people are, building some hardcore enterprise platform stuff, and that's not very relevant to me because I'm more interested in startups and new products. And I wish there was some way of technology that helps you identify like interestingness. Like every person is interesting,
but relevant
on a personal level. But,
yeah, you want to know who's relevant to you in what you're currently interested in. Yeah. So something we're going to try out at a future pop-up village is have a number of different kind of information input, like UX experiences. So we can ask people either through writing or have like a GPT-4 powered chatbot, or have people just send voice notes to answer the question, like, what are you interested in? What are you trying to get out of this experience? What have you been reading recently? What have you been thinking about? All of these things. So just really easy way to get some information. It'll take 10 minutes of people's time. And then, we can store that privately, and, we don't ever have to see it. And maybe people don't care, but I'm not going to be reading your stuff. But what we can do is just create a service where it connects you with people, and it doesn't even have to say what you have in common. It's just like, you guys are going to really enjoy talking to each other. Just go and have coffee, Something we've been experimenting with, which I guess is like social technology related, so it's relevant to this, is we just found that small groups is a format that is very productive, meaning we create groups of like 5 to 6 people, and we give them very light scaffolding for a conversation that they should have together. And the results are just incredible. Like, people feel so connected. If you structure it, again, very lightweight structure it in a way where people feel like they have a chance to participate, they hear each other talk, And you can form those groups again with Cursive. They know what people are interested in. Form those groups around interest or potentially even difference in opinion. That's super powerful, right? Like here we get into ideas around plurality, which I would love to talk about. But again, we have the ability to create technology that can actually maybe create connection across divides, which is so important right now. And that's the kind of thing that, you know, people are building at Edge City. So that's what's currently happening. We've also done, you know, I mean, there's a list on our website. There's probably like 20, 30 projects, but we've done community currency experiments with Radical Exchange, which is an organization started by Glenn Weil, and I think Vitalik's on the board there. So
how did it work?
Yeah, so community currency, we created one called Edges. People could buy in. It wasn't on chain or anything, just for the initial test. It was literally just a database. And the thesis we had was that there is a layer of interaction that's between the interactions that people have where it's just friends, you know? So like, let's say I ask you, hey, can you help me move my apartment? I'm moving to a new apartment. And you're like, yeah, sure. And if I give you beer and pizza or whatever, that feels good. But if I give you $10 afterwards, you're like, oh, that's kind of gross. Like you don't need to financialize this thing. We're friends, right?
So gratitude.
Right. So there's like gratitude type interactions. And then there's obviously market interactions, right? There's like traditional payment, whatever. We had a theory that maybe there's kind of this mezzanine layer of interaction where it's not something you'd necessarily be comfortable paying for, but it's also a bit more involved than just like your friend. Especially at the community level where you have 300 people. It's a high trust environment, but I might not know this person. So like, I would maybe feel weird, you know, getting paid to watch their kid for an hour. But if there's this fun edges thing, it's kind of like, oh, it's community currency, cool. Sure, I'll take 50 edges to babysit your child and talk to them about AI or whatever. So that was the theory. And then, so what did people actually do with it? You know, we kind of put it out there and it was really fascinating. Like people were going out to the local markets and bringing things back and kind of trading them for edges. People were giving lectures. Someone started cutting edge capital where they were like investing in people and with edges. So again, like it was like a 3-week experience because it started just after the start of the month, but already so much data on, you know, the possibility of something like that and like ways to improve it and things like that. So that's a cool example.
That's actually, it reminds me, I read a paper recently. It's about, the name of it is Cybernetic Objects, currencies as cybernetic objects. So the idea, a lot of people like this, a lot of talk on Twitter, especially about how AI might influence the economy. Maybe we will transition to like post-labor economy where AI is doing all the job and we don't really need money and we have UBI. I don't know when this will happen, but this raises interesting question about fiscal and more importantly monetary system. Like why do you need currency and why do you need money and what is money in that world where a lot of work is automated with robots and AI agents? And this paper gives an answer, which for me, of all answers that I've heard for this question, is the most compelling, which is we will have new type of currency, and these cybernetic objects would be things like reputation, skills, contribution, you being nice to someone, you being helpful, you being interesting, you being involved with other people, you being connected, you being I don't know, just people willing to giving you kudos for something. So this is just one of the examples of these like experiments that will, I think inevitably there will be a point in human history where this will be necessary, where just like traditional monetary system will become obsolete.
Completely
and this
agreed.
Is probably, I don't know, if maybe you guys did the first ever large-scale example of this outside of just purely online setting. Of course, like on forums, we can we have Reddit Karma, but online is different. Online, it's not physical interaction. It's not as deep.
Yeah, no, I mean, I won't take full credit for being the first. There have been other kind of IRL community currency experiments that the main one I'm thinking about is Circles, which was started by Martin Köppelmann from Gnosis. But and that was in Berlin, and while I lived there, I used it, and it was a really interesting experiment. They're actually launching a kind of a V2 of that soon. Yeah. But totally, it's like such an interesting idea of like what is currency, and currency is such a clear cybernetic object. But when you know, like you're saying, when maybe the role of like a fiat currency starts to be less important, I think it's going to be a lot of vibes, like vibes, trust, you know. I think we're just going to have very intricate webs of trust where I trust you explicitly, therefore I trust the people that you trust implicitly. And yeah, and I think that's probably a healthy thing, as long as the systems that we use for that are decentralized and are protocols like, you know, TCP/IP or HTTP, like things that no government or company controls. Ideally, it's just a system that we have, you know, created in a decentralized way. Because the failure mode or the dystopia mode of that kind of cybernetic currency object, where it's based on like social credit or whatever, like what you did for people, what you did for the state, is something like what's happening, you know, in China right now, where it's kind of the early versions of this, where like, if you say something bad about, you know, things they don't like on social media, maybe you can't get on the train the next day, or you get like a slight discount on your salary for a year or something, where it's like such an insane level of control that it's just kind of terrifying. So we definitely don't want that. And I think that like, I honestly, people listening to this like probably are kind of understand the possibility of this, and I think should realize that like we can't just really sit around. That's kind of an imperative here to develop these things before, you know, as like a defensive measure, as like a defensive technology, before, you know, the centralization aspect of AI catches up. So that's hopefully, again, like I hope Edge City is kind of a live player in that movement as well.
Yeah, and that is an urgent problem, to be honest. We call this cyber slavery, just for fun, just as a alternative or in contrast to cybernetic economy. You have cyber slavery, and I want to talk about governance system because governance is an important part, and like we need identity, we need reputation, we need all these things to make better and more democratic and more open and maybe more programmable, more predictable decisions. However, DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, they've been around for at least 10 years, and they were initially invented this idea as a way to create open governance systems. I've seen and participated in, I don't know, dozens, maybe hundreds of different DAOs, and most of them actually failed. Most of them either, there was nothing to govern, and that's one problem, where people just focus on the technology but not focus on like what this technology enables. Others, they kind of ended up in plutocracy, where a few people have control over the governance rights or tokens that govern this. And even though the protocols are open, it's still on Ethereum. It's cryptographically verifiable and permissionless and trustless, and everything is good. But this, I think, nature of the economy. A lot of systems usually evolve towards oligopoly.
Yeah.
At least in the short run, and where you have this open market transfer. So and this is not this is natural state of things, but I don't think it's the most efficient one. I think the most efficient one is where you have local coordination in a global open system. that's how nature works.
Yeah.
Like you don't have centrally controlled systems in nature.
Yeah.
Most of the decisions in your like cells in your body, or ants in the colony, or like swarms of bees or trees, mushrooms, whatever, most of the decisions are done locally, and there's a good reason for that. And the reason is that the communication overhead is much lower. So like biological systems are trying to conserve energy, and to reduce communication overhead, you want to make local coordination. And that is huge inefficiency of the existing large structures like governments and nation states and corporations, is that they have to make decisions centrally without having the right resolution. If you make a decision on the country level and you are like just a person who has like certain bandwidth in your brain, you cannot make the decision optimal to every single person or community in that country. So, first question is, how like did you see these examples of governance going like not working, and what are, in your opinion, the solutions or countermeasures to prevent this capture of power and oligopoly and plutocracy?
Yeah. I feel like fundamentally governance is conflict, and good governance is dealing with conflict well. And that's actually a good thing, and it's not something to be upset about. I think communities where there are diverse opinions, heterogeneous opinions, can map idea spaces much quicker. They just get many different views on things, and that's a good thing. And so the key aspect of governance, especially with DAOs, is just figuring out the right systems to deal with that. Right now, it's primarily forums, which is not the right UX for dealing with, communities at this scale that are so, fractal and decentralized and all over the world and whatever. I think the way that people will relate to governance will just be very different 5 years from now. So I think, you're going to wake up and you're going to get a download from your, the agent, your agent that watches the local supermarket co-op that you're a part of. And it's going to say, maybe it's just going to give you once a month updates. Like, hey, by the way, there's these bylaw decisions that you need to vote on. Here's what I think you will want. Yes or no. You say, yep, that sounds great. Cool, goes away, handles that with all the other agents that compile that information and make the right decision there. Then, maybe once a day you get an update from your agent that is monitoring the like Optimism Superchain ecosystem, which is your preferred ecosystem of choice that you belong to for your financial stuff. So then it's like, that's where your savings are. That's the payment rails used for most of your stuff. And it's like, hey, here's what's happening in the discussion forums. They're not going to be forums like we think of them. They're going to be like, kind of essentially like embedding spaces of information where everyone's feelings and opinions about what should happen get like sorted out really fast at like machine speed, like you say in your excellent essays about this. So, and then, it might be like, hey, here's a discussion. We're thinking about upgrading the protocol in this way. The engineers have thought through it. It looks good. Like, which way will you vote your tokens? Or do you want to delegate it to Stepan? Because he's been really thinking about this because he's interested. I'm like, cool, delegate. I trust him. So I think like, and then, 10 other things, including the federal elections that you want to take part in, but also the local government and the local park and the local whatever, plus the, the global community that you're a part of that really cares about some particular issue and that you want to be involved in. So I think like the idea of governance, ideally, we can drop that word because it sounds terrible, but it's just participating in the things that, that govern your life. Is just how it's going to be, I hope, right? That's what, when I think of like high bandwidth democracy, when I think of plurality, that's what comes to mind, and that's what's so exciting in the future.
Do you see any risks here? Because I definitely support this vision. I think that communication bandwidth is the largest limiting factor in quality of decision maker, and it's both for people who are being governed or like who are participating in the democracy, and the bureaucracy or administration or like whoever is actually executing and making some executive decisions, like Congress or president or whatever. But as we introduce technology here, there's a digital voting, for example, could be a possibility for many years in many countries, but a lot of countries are not doing this because that there is a risk that some people just get excluded. So maybe elder population or people who are not very familiar with this technology. Also, it is harder to track and harder to verify compared to traditional paper-based ballots, because it's like there's centuries of experience of running the system. So if we introduce technology at the city level, at the nation state level, at the maybe global level, or blockchain level, whatever, I think do you think there's a risk of people being excluded because this technology is complex, they don't understand it, and even if they understand it, the level of complexity would allow more sophisticated actors to somehow influence this, and just like we have hacks for cryptocurrency exchanges.
100%, that's something we need to think through, and I think that's why we need to be iterating so that we make the mistakes and that we learn in kind of like smaller, safer contexts. In terms of exclusionary, I don't think so, because, you know, we wouldn't just switch over instantly, right? Like there would probably be some transition period where people could, for a very long time, still vote or participate in the way that they would like to, in the way that they're used to, while the new system is coming in. You know, like in the same way that when elevators became automated, they still had the person in there for a long time because people just weren't used to the fact that it was all happening by itself. They wanted a human there. But over time that got taken away, and there'll probably be something similar with self-driving cars where there's some like transition period where people still want to get in an Uber. Maybe, you know, some people are more risk on, like I'll get in a self-driving car for sure, but maybe someone who's not used to that will still want to get in an Uber, and even if the car is self-driving, they still want someone there just in case.
I guess it's also the question about trust and legitimacy. So if people don't 100%. Trust the system, they won't comply or
yeah, but how much do people trust the current system? Extremely low. And yeah, like we might, you know, hand wave and say like, well, open source cryptography, you can actually verifiably show that it's trustworthy and whatever. That's just not going to mean a lot for a lot of people. So it's a really good point you're making. But the key thing here is that like changing anything about the way that governance works is incredibly difficult, because both sides are not incentivized to try to push that forward, because the other side always thinks that they're trying to like pull a fast one on them. And so we live, you know, the current political system, at least in the US, it's like it's pretty much deadlocked in terms of like advancing any kind of, you know, system upgrade on the way that voting works, let alone a bunch of other stuff. So that's why, again, pop-up cities are an important kind of intermediate step, because first we demonstrate it works at our scale. Then, you know, maybe big companies start to take it up and they start in their regional offices, and then at the company, global company scale, they start to use the technology for like, you know, company surveys or whatever, and it's all cryptographically secure and everyone's excited about it being privacy preserving, whatever. And then after a few years of that, then like a small country starts to use it. And then, you know, and this is already happening. Like you go to Georgia, for example, or I was just in Bhutan. Like in Bhutan, they have something called Bhutan NDI, which is a self-sovereign identity platform. Fully integrated, it works. Like almost half the country is using it. They use it for like wedding registries and register your car or whatever. All the data is like sovereign to the people. This like SSI is something we've been talking about in crypto forever, and they've just like gone and done it, and it works. It's amazing. So I think this is how this stuff starts to get implemented. And yeah, and over time, I think it's just going to get better and better, but it's a really valid concern that we obviously just need to do the work to make sure it doesn't get co-opted. You know,
I do believe it's inevitable, because in the US, for example, there was just like a bunch of like very correct decisions being made a few hundred years ago, and so it still works. Other countries maybe not as lucky
Totally.
in terms of their governance practices. The reason why I got excited about crypto, I think it was like maybe not the first thing, but in 2015, I very vividly remember I read the paper by Ralph Merkel called DAO Democracy, and that like after that point, like I actually told myself that I want to work full time and spend like next 10 years doing this. And the DAO Democracy is basically, so Ralph Merkel, he's cryptographer, also scientist. I think now he works in doing something in nanomaterials and nanobiology even. And he invented hash functions, so a lot of like foundational stuff in cryptography. And this paper, it talks about basically how you would replace Congress with the algorithm, with the smart contract. Back then, it was before Ethereum was released, so he uses Bitcoin as an example. He says that Bitcoin is a form of life, and this form of life can like make something useful to people, create value. And one example of that is basically becoming a legislative body. And how it works is basically every person in the country has to answer one question once a year, and that kind of question is, did your I don't remember exactly, but something like did your life become better over the last year? Yes or no? So very simple question. And then for every bill and for every law that is being passed, you just run a prediction market against how would this, like for example, if we decide to open a park in the next block, or if we decide to, I don't know, go to war, or we decide to like to spend $100 billion on AI project. The prediction market is trying to, is asking if this project will positively or negatively influence the resulting score for the whole population at the end of the year.
Cool.
And if it is yes, if like majority is yes, then this law is passed or this project is started. It's very basic. It's very like simple idea, but I think it's very, it's like based on first principles. And this is still, of course, something that is yet to happen, and maybe the real world system would be more sophisticated. But yeah, just an example. So
it's such a good example. I mean, this touches again, I'm going to bring up Bhutan again, but you know, they have this concept of gross national happiness instead of gross domestic product as their key metric that they're basing on. And I met with the team that administers that survey, and it's just fascinating. Like they are, it's really fundamental to the way they run their country, and they base policy decisions on it. And they run the survey every 5 years, but they do kind of like intermediate studies, trying to track, like how will potential policy decisions affect the well-being and the flourishing of the people in the country. I mean, and the reason we were meeting is that I was sitting in on a team of developers who were essentially advising them on what it would look like to make this thing digital and make it much more higher bandwidth, right? So right now, the way it works is that people go out into the field. They go out, there's parts of Bhutan that are extremely rural still. There's no roads to get to them. It's mostly, in those parts, it's like farmer communities. And could you create a system that's so simple to use that it's just like a case of answering a few questions, once every few months or something, and just getting a bit more of a sense of how people are doing, and then using that as an input for your politics? I mean, that's incredible. Like, talk about cybernetic systems and like feedback loops and ways to actually get information from people that isn't just one decision they make every 4 years or something. I know I keep saying that, but I think that's important.
Yeah, it's all about resolution. Like the main idea of cybernetic system is that in order to make, I think it's called Ashby law, pretty much like the foundational kind of theorem or law in cybernetics, and it says that you can only make decisions on the level of resolution of the system that you are governing. So if it is like one person making decisions, then you need to dumb down the whole complexity of like hundreds of millions of people living in the country to something that can be uploaded into the mind of a single person. And then you then need to expand it back again. And you have all these conversion losses and
100%.
translation problems on the way on the kind of archiving part, and then on the unzipping.
Yeah, exactly. Like a really clear example of Ashby's law for people who don't know it and who want to understand. The concept is like to understand and control a system of a certain variance, you need a system of at least equal variance. And an example of that is like, imagine you have a building with 10 rooms and you have a thermostat system and each of the rooms has different temperatures and you only have one thermostat, which you just put in the middle and you try and use that to control, you know, to get information of how you should change the temperature in each room. And you can't do that because so much is lost in that conversion from the 10 different spaces to just the one sensor you have. So you need at least 10 sensors in each room to be able to administer, you know, and follow the goal of creating like a good temperature environment in that system. And that's just like an example of how, when you expand that to the nation level, it's like, you know, in the US, there's 300 million people. How on earth can you have a system that like is of that variance? So things just get compressed at each stage of the hierarchy. So I think that's really important. Another thing I'll add here is when we think about like how can blockchain be and AI be instrumental in governance? There's this interesting idea from this guy called, I forget his first name, but Whitehead is his second name. And he says that you can think of civilizational advance, like civilization progresses at the rate at which we can do complex tasks without thinking about them. So for example, when cars first were invented and the first 100 cars were on the road, it was an insane level of there was an insane level of energy that had to be put into making that system work. They had something called the red flag law in London where people had to walk in front of the car with a big red flag kind of waving like, hey, there's this new thing coming that you're not used to, you know. And then now fast forward and we have all of these really simple protocols with traffic lights and all this stuff where like millions of cars are whizzing past us all the time, super close to each other, but entirely, you know, majority of the time avoiding any kind of bad side effects. And so that's like a progress of civilization. And I think of like mapping that onto what's happening now with kind of cybernetic governance systems and whatever. It's very awkward right now. Like we're trying to figure out, how does this stuff work? How do we make decisions in groups with people all over the world instead of just in this one place? How can we try to function without strict hierarchies? And I think over time, we're just going to develop the protocols that allow us to do that without even thinking about it, right? And so that's one angle through which to look at kind of progress in governance.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to chat to talk about plurality. So I think it's connected. It's like this idea of how the governance can work by Glenn Whale and I forgot the name of
Audrey Tang.
Yeah. Can you briefly explain like what is plurality like in practical terms for societies, for either pop-up villages or larger
totally
structures?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm definitely not an expert on this, but I've read the book and I really enjoyed it, so I'll do my best shot. So plurality is essentially the point of the book is that right now it feels like technology and democracy are antagonistic forces, right? So you have on the one hand you have technology like AI, which is just an insanely centralizing force. It gives the current power structures so much power to understand what people are doing and control their lives and whatever. And if there's dissent, you know, in autocracies, they can quickly snuff it out because they have so much information about what's happening. So on that end, technology is just really, pressing down on democracy. On the other end, technology has also created this crazy information environment that we're in right now, where so much of the kind of information diet for people is, based on algorithmic feeds. And the feeds are, I think it's well understood now that they are very designed for engagement. And what we've learned is that human psychology is most engaged when it's outraged. So they are essentially designed for outrage, amongst other things, but just to be addictive, right? And turns out that's just like not a good system for information. It's polarized people. There's, crazy levels of suicides, depression, etc. So from these two angles, technology is seemingly affecting democratic systems, right? Like in democracy, you need to find ways to find agreement across disagreement and find ways to move forward. And when things are so polarized and so potentially like, panopticon-like, it's just very difficult to do that. And the main idea of the book is that shouldn't have to be the case. There are technologies that can allow us to actually improve the way that democracy works. And they're not just hypothetical, they exist and they've been tried. And in particular, they've been implemented in Taiwan. And Taiwan is a very interesting place for this to be tried because it's a democracy, but it's also like one of the most high stakes environments right now, right? It has a very antagonistic neighbor who doesn't even acknowledge its existence and is very vocal about the fact that they believe, China believes that Taiwan is technically still part of their territory. And they've been making a lot of signals that they will try to make that a reality. And it's just getting more and more high stakes recently, especially with kind of a more isolationist American foreign policy. So in Taiwan, it's a democracy, but like things have to work well. They have to figure out ways to get along. It's a very heterogeneous society that not like in terms of not in terms of the demographics as far as I'm aware, but it's still diverse in the sense of like different opinions, etc. So there's a lot of areas of potential clash. But what they found is, so through Audrey Tang's work, who's the digital minister there, or at least was until recently when she's now focusing on writing the book and building the plurality movement, what they found is that actually they've been using collective intelligence technology to create, to get information from a wide variety of people, from a plurality of people, that they can then take in and make decisions around to drive policy. So specifically what Audrey and her team did is, I think can be described as like hacktivism, where they were just brilliant, coders, and they were just really upset that the government wasn't doing enough to share information, etc. So they took publicly available data and they made a series of websites with that they called Gov0. So instead of GOV, it's G0V. Essentially, these are just way better tools for accessing government data, government services, etc., than the government actually had themselves. And so eventually the government just had to pay attention, and instead of squashing it, they hired Audrey as their first digital minister and just improved their the technology of their services by a lot. And another example they give in the book is that they used a collective deliberation tool called Polis, POL.is, to get input from a wide variety of constituents about the introduction of Uber into the country. And they received, at first this whole thing was very controversial, but using this collective intelligence and deliberation tool, they were able to find a lot of overlap in people's core values and what they wanted and what they believed in, and craft the policy that way. So I think that plurality is fundamentally just the truth of humanity. I think there is a you know how there's this famous quote of like the line between good and evil runs through every human heart. I think there is like plurality that runs through every human body, soul, heart, whatever. Like we are just such diverse people. Like there's parts of me that belong in, you know, this community, Edge City. There's parts of me that are British, that are American, that are Russian, you know. There's parts of me that, you know, whatever, just so many diverse, heterogeneous aspects of me. And I think that's the same in community as well, where everyone is so different, and that's actually something that's beautiful and should be celebrated, and we should find ways to integrate that instead of creating this like division between people, that it's so easy to fall for that kind of rhetoric. And it's just obviously more happening more and more these days. So I'm very excited about that. In the context of pop-up cities, I think that we can be places of kind of trialing these ideas, especially, you know, collective deliberation tools. Let's create an AI bot that takes in everyone's like values and meaning and what they find like meaningful in the world. And then, you know, there's people already running experiments with this with the Meaning Alignment Institute and OpenAI. They just wrote a paper about how when you get people together and you have them talk to the AI bot about what they find meaningful and their values, you can actually find so much, so many shared values, even across the political divide on really hot button issues like abortion or things like this. And I think that's a really good thing, and that's healthy. And it's actually like super necessary for where we're at in society right now.
I think, it's like solving the problem of like this higher dimensionality of values and different values and different goals and different properties of different identities. It is solving the problem of resolution, because again, just for the sake of saving calories or energy, our minds, especially online, we're just trying to label people. Okay, this person like wrote once something that I don't like. Like
Right.
Vitalik has this post about communism, and it was like for April 1st joke.
Yeah.
And still like now there's like hundreds of people who tell that he's a communist just because he had April 1st funny post.
Right.
So like we try to simplify things because we don't brain is wired to save calories.
But by the way, on that note, like it's also because we spend the majority of our time, of our deliberation time online in spaces, in digital spaces that are designed to constrict nuance, right? Like
yes,
Twitter is an outrage machine. Like it specifically, like you see people who, you know, you might know personally, and the way they act on there is just like crazy. Like it's just a complete dunking on other people. No good intention of trying to hear their opinion. It's just like who can get the most likes because they say the funniest, meanest thing or whatever, right? And obviously that starts at the top, and there's certain people that really exemplify that. So like it's just like not a plural space. Everything is condensed. Even this communism thing with Vitalik, and suddenly it's like people just want to get the points. They want to get the likes for dunking on him or that idea or someone else that stands up for it.
I think not even likes, but just like somehow some satisfaction.
Exactly.
So there's like two things that are like the recipe for disaster. One is social media creates echo chambers. So you like people and you only see people who agree with you politically or in terms of like how technology should, like whatever the topic is. And in the same time, you are so you mostly see the content that only supports your view. So you get used to the fact that anything that is outside of this echo chamber is just completely wrong or non-existent, and those people are crazy. And at the same time, the algorithm is incentivized to show you these contradicting opinions and create fights and spark this anger and outrage online.
Right. They show you just enough that you can then go back to your tribe and be like, look what that crazy person just said. You know, it's just like, that's exactly what it's designed for. And that's just not a good way to it can be fun, but it's not a good way to run politics or a society. Actually, Glenn Weil, the author of Plurality, had an interesting idea that I heard on a podcast recently where he was like, well, what if you created a system where, let's say it's Congress, right? And the way that you had to do it is that anything that had to be passed would actually have to have bipartisan support. So if only one side votes for something, it just gets downvoted, no go. Something can only pass if there's enough of a majority from both sides. Or it's something where, like, sure, if everyone on one side votes for something and they have a majority, maybe it goes through. But actually, there's a much lower bar if there's plurality across the spectrum.
It's actually similar to community nodes on Twitter.
Exactly, that's how community nodes works.
Best features of Twitter.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. And so, to your point, like, what are we experimenting with? What can we experiment with? We now have all the building blocks. The technology is there. We could literally create a governance system that we could copy and paste and run the next pop-up city or even a series of pop-up cities with this kind of thing, with like plurality mindset of, okay, let's get a sense where people are at, what they believe in, what they feel like is important to them. And then let's have a set of discussions or even decisions to make about, you know, shared resources, but we structure it in a way where we actually incentivize people to reach across the divide of opinion and find commonality rather than just like, you know, well, you know, screw those guys. Like, I don't want to deal with them. I'm just going to do my own thing.
Do you think the systems are ready today to manage something significant, like, for example, treasury or budgets? Because that's where you have all the malicious actors and all the exploitation. Like, if there's a way to steal or somehow get money or get grants for myself, then there would be a lot of people who would try to exploit it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's ready to be tried. I don't know the latest and greatest in terms of, you know, DAO governance, in terms of like grant giving and stuff, but I would say that it's like, I know that there are people running experiments like this. There was something like this that was run by Pooja Alhava at a conference in Berlin where, yeah, it was like a kind of a plurality score, and basically people's opinions were taken into account in terms of like finding ways to collaborate, and it was kind of incentivizing people to collaborate with people maybe they wouldn't necessarily agree with often or whatever. So I think there are experiments like running like this. I think it's very important. I think this is actually maybe where my concept of a network society is slightly different to like what people think of when they say network state. Because the idea of a network state is, you know, has been kind of consolidated by Balaji Srinivasan, and he's just like an excellent communicator. So took a lot of ideas that kind of existed and put them into a very coherent meme and very coherent concept. And I think at least reading that book, he's writing a V2 now, I believe. So maybe his thinking is updated, but reading that book, the core concept there is this idea of exit, right? Like you have this one commandment, that this thing that everyone believes in, and if you don't like it, you can just leave, right? And so if you are like if you are a Bitcoin maximalist, you can go and live on the island of Bitcoin maximalists. But then, you know, and then if you have disagreement there, like don't bother trying to figure it out. If you disagree with the CEO, you can just like fork and do your own thing. And so, you know, the Bitcoin maxis that are carnivore diet and the Bitcoin maxis that are vegan are going to all split. And then within that, like, okay, some of them like Brian Johnson, some of them don't. It's just super fractal, right? So then eventually you just get all like 1,000 different autocratic kind of groups where there's one dear leader for each one or whatever, and like some element of exit or whatever. To me, it's just less interesting that way. Like I see that there is plurality between the different nodes, but in the individual node, you're just going to have a complete monoculture, right? It's like you have finally found the people that agree with all of your views, but there's like 10 of you and or whatever, there might be more, but it's just like not interesting again, because people are diverse, faceted creatures. And I think we need to develop the tools to reach agreement, and it might take longer, but I'm just like a democracy maxi. I care about this stuff. I think this is important. I care about like, what we think of as traditional liberal values, and that's just something we're going to have to figure out, and we can use technology to improve it.
Balazs also talks about the recognition, international recognition, and like eventually ability to like issue passports and have UN representation. Do you think is it long term? Is it the goal for HCT? And do you think it is important at all?
It's really interesting. I mean, look, he's really smart, right? So I think he has a reason for that. And I think what it served, the role that point served in that book was to get people excited about like playing in the big leagues. I don't know if he actually cares about that. Like I personally don't. I think international recognition will probably happen as a byproduct of like being successful, in the same way that, I don't know, Facebook has international recognition. It's like understood by.
But do you need more countries? Do we do? Yeah. I agree. I think.
Do we need more like nation states, as in the current like Westphalian system of like nation states? Maybe. I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily what we want. If we, I think we need to move beyond nation states, to be honest. Yeah. Like, I don't think they need to go away. I don't think we should like delete them and just have instant anarchy or whatever. But I think over time they will just start to be less relevant for people.
Yeah. You have layer one, which is, I don't know, Italy. Italy is great. Italy like should exist.
Love Italy, for sure. It should exist.
And then layer two, which is you are doing AI research and building, let's say, AI governance system that is your community or your artist, and you are part of this community, and you have this capacity for collective action, how Balaji puts it.
Yeah,
totally. There's no contradiction. Like, you don't need to destroy one to get the other.
Of course not. I think there will be collective action groups. Like right now, I think of like the big movements of the world as being ripe for something like this, right? Like I think the climate movement could start a network society pretty quickly if they wanted to. I think Don't Die, Brian Johnson, that's like about to become one. And it's, there's other things there. It's kind of a meme. There's probably Don't Die is probably going to launch a token, or maybe they already have. But like, I think these things will start to exist, and eventually there's probably going to be a point where one of them is like, hey, why don't we have representation at the United Nations, right? And some of them will really care about that. They're going to be like, we need to be, at the General Assembly, or at least have some representative, because there's millions of us and we all, we also matter, or whatever. And other people are just gonna be, we're just gonna start our own UN, right? We're gonna start our own united network of pop-up cities or whatever, or like, we joked about the united network of Zulu villages. And over time, that's just going to become more important, I think. And again, like, we are plural entities. We can have both. It's okay to feel belonging to the country you were born in, because that's, that's the shared narrative, the shared story into which you care about. For me, that's just less salient, right? Like, I don't have that much. But I mean, I was born in Russia. I was born in Siberia. Like, I'm not. I have a different relationship to like national pride. Like, there's some of it for sure, and with England and the US now where I live, I don't know, it's complicated, but I see some friends who like really care about like America first, exceptionalism, whatever, and it just feels kind of dated to me. I think that's going to be a hot take, but like, it's just not that interesting. I don't know. I care much more about like the things that we can create in the world, versus kind of harkening back to some prior time of greatness or whatever.
Yeah. It's like getting satisfaction from things that you didn't do and you don't really have anything to do with, except for maybe like having like the same passports or living in the same city.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because like with nationalism, there are so many things that are downstream of that can be bad, right? And I lived in Berlin for a few years recently, and like in Germany, you just like don't see German flags anywhere, and like with good reason, right? There's historical precedent.
You only see them in these like small gardens, like when you drive on S-Bahn. There's small 10 meters by 10 meters gardens, but not in the city.
Right, exactly. And then at like football matches, right? But I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
I think you were talking about nationalism and.
Well, sorry. Yes, sorry. I got my point. Okay, so in Germany, you don't really see flags, but having a shared culture is important, right? Like tapping into shared history, keeping languages alive through use, like paying respect to just like ancestors and the historical reality of where you come from, I think is really important. So I don't want to take away from that. But I think this idea of like, this is who we are and we need to band together and, I don't know, destroy everyone else, or like we're better than everyone else. It's just like, I don't know. I think we need to quickly evolve out of that and evolve more into some kind of global consciousness, or at least like, have affinity to groups that do span the globe in some capacity. Because I guarantee that there are people in China or India or New Zealand or whatever, in like Nigeria, who I'm just much more similar to, and maybe I'll want to, not that we share all the same views, right? Again, you don't want a monoculture, but we're just like in the same part of our lives, or we care about the same things right now, or we want to build something together, right? And again, like you're saying, just the things that you can do, it's just like much more interesting, I think.
Almost feel like one of the probably most popular questions, if I don't ask it right now, would be in this context would be around the just force, because international relationships, they are not really very high level in terms of like emotional intelligence or intelligence at all. It's more like this the survival of the strongest, and it's very, very basic, and it works for some reason. Like that's how it works. So and like military is a big part of that. So if you have these digital communities, or if you have these physical communities that are located, distributed globally, but you still have big powers, China, Russia, US, and EU and others with nuclear weapons and fighter jets and all of that. It feels like for me, there's unresolved contradiction that you can build something.
Yeah.
Like what happened in Ukraine, what might happen in Taiwan. I hope not. That digital technology cannot. Like you can maybe save your money with Bitcoin. That's great. I know a lot of people from Ukraine who would have lost everything if they didn't use cryptocurrency. But the physical part of it is still like, and actually the development of AI and the speed of development of AI is probably making it more important, because AI is also to a large degree a military technology. And I just read this book that was released, I think, 3 days ago by CEO of Palantir, Alex Karp, and he talks about AI being like the most important military technology of our age, and his basically claim is like, stop building ride-sharing apps and food delivery. We should actually focus on building AI for like not just military but also education and healthcare. But primarily he talks about like this enforcement aspect of it. Do you like what's your thought on this? Is it like just an inevitability that we need to somehow move around?
Man, it's so interesting. Okay, so I'll preface by saying I'm really not an expert on this or necessarily even well read. I feel like I have a good understanding of the history of, you know, war and statehood. I don't know where things are going, and I realize that it could come off as just being fully naive of just like, or kind of, you know, as just abdicating responsibility of being like, it'll be fine, you know. Like, I think in reality, again, we're not trying to supersede the nation state by any means, not for a long time. What that means is that people will still have to interface with the reality of where they're from, right? Right now we're in the US, and we, you know, shouldn't take for granted the fact that a lot of what is possible here is possible because of the military that the US has, right? It feels like we're moving more into kind of this like dual polar world with US and China. Again, I'm not a geopolitical expert, but I think that's just going to be the reality of it. Maybe there's, similar to the Cold War, there's like some equilibrium that's reached, some kind of like game theoretic thing where, you know, like God forbid any actual conflict, but like even the proxy wars get minimized, hopefully, and you know, eventually, hopefully, they're just fought with drones, and it becomes a war of economics rather than human lives lost. In all of that context, where do we stand with our little network state experiments? Do I think we're going to have a military? No, I don't think so. I like personally, that's not interesting to me. I think there are ways to build like defensive technology. Something I've heard people talk about is like kind of a hedgehog strategy of like, let's say you start your own little charter city somewhere and you're really worried about people invading you. You have some kind of poison pill that you just broadcast to everyone that's like, hey, we have this, I don't know, whatever, like bioweapon, and we are all immune to it, and we will not use it ever unless someone comes and tries to mess with us, and then we're gonna like break it, and then it's all hell breaks loose. So it's something like that. I don't know. This is just getting kind of sci-fi. At the end of the day, also, I think cyber attacks is probably where a lot of the actual action will take place, especially with AI. So that's something that network societies will have to contend with, and hopefully we'll find, you know, good providers to help them with that, so that their resources are safe and things like that. But yeah, I mean, like, how would you, what are the attack vectors on a distributed network of humans, right? Like if someone wanted right now to attack, I don't know, like a nomading community, like how do you invade that? Like what is the, like what are you taking over, right? I guess you could potentially kidnap some of the members, and that's something that the community would have to get involved in helping.
No, this is probably closer to how intelligence, at least like in the history back in the day, how intelligence agencies were dealing with any kind of movement that they didn't like communist
100%.
movements in the US,
Yeah,
or
100%.
non-communist movements in USSR and so on. So it was like infiltrating and trying to maybe change the ideas or create internal dispute, but that is probably becoming progressively more complex. Yeah, so I don't know. For me, it's also an open question, but I also don't think that, at least right now, any of these distributed communities and network states are the targets. I think they might just be collateral victims if there's anything happening. And they are not the solution of the like geopolitical game theoretic problems. That's what I feel.
I completely agree. I think the like what gets people excited and wound up about this is that they make like a very clear set of kind of logical leaps, which is, okay, we're going to start a network state. That means we're going to be sovereign. Sovereign means territory. Territory means we need to protect it, you know, and then suddenly you have like militia and private police being like discussed and whatever. And I just remember being at this actually happened at Zuzalu, and hearing about some of the more like libertarian leaning experiments that are being run right now, and there's like all the private police forces and stuff. And I'm like, man, it's interesting that experiments are being run, and like I'm again all for experimentation, but for me, the potential failure mode, the potential dystopia mode of that is so close to like, you know, okay, you say something the leader of the place you live in disagrees with, you just either just kicked out straight away or like something potentially worse or whatever. So
is that what happened with Prospera, or at least might happen?
no, I don't think so. I think Prospera, again, I know what I've read in the news and maybe one or two conversations with people there, but I know very smart people who are still investing time and energy and money there. So I think they imagine they're going to figure it out. It's seeming like, you know, the current administration in Honduras are, so essentially for people who don't know, Prospera is a kind of a special zone in, on an island in, technically in Honduran territory. They figured out a deal with the prior administration about, you know, they're going to be a zone for like a long time. They can't be messed with, whatever. There was an election. There's a new administration. The new administration has deemed these kinds of zones as unconstitutional. And so I believe Prospera is going to take them into like international arbitration, trying to sue them for some insane amount of money because Prospera has investors and whatever. It's just like sticky, and honestly it seems like a terrible situation, but it seems like they're just going to try and wait it out until the next government and try and just like slow things down. But Prospera is an interesting example because Prospera can pretty much do what they want from a legal perspective, aside from when it comes to things that touch on criminality. So if someone you know, kills someone else on Prosperian territory, then they are subject to Honduran law. And there's a few other things I think where Honduran law takes precedence. But other than that, in Prospera, you can go and you can do all kinds of crazy like biotech experiments. And that's why some of those types of experiments are setting up there and things like that. So yeah, it's interesting, and we'll see what happens. I hope nothing too crazy for either side.
I think we discussed a lot of things. It's been more than 2 hours.
Cool.
Yeah, so super interesting, very deep conversation. Like we touched on all these futuristic, but also hopefully realistic past different ways to how the future of coordination and society might look like. That's super exciting. Thank you for sharing this, and I wish you success and a lot of interesting things happening with HCT and developing and really achieving its mission.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.